The rebel who showed the shame behind our desires, Freud. What if the desires you're most ashamed of, the ones you try hardest to hide, are actually the key to understanding who you really are? What if your search for love, your fear of failure, even your need to be seen, were all shaped not by your conscious choices, but by forgotten childhood wounds? Sigmund Freud didn't just found modern psychology. He cracked open the human soul and forced us to confront the uncomfortable truth: we are not in control. Behind every thought, decision, and feeling there's a shadow self pulling the strings. In this video we'll dive into the world of Freud, not the clinical textbook version, but the rebel thinker who exposed the shame behind our desires and changed how we see ourselves forever. And trust me, once you understand what Freud discovered, you'll never look at your relationships, your emotions, or even your identity the same way again. Before we begin, hit that like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell, because what you're about to hear might be the missing piece you've been looking for. 1. Freud's awakening: the hidden forces that control you. Sigmund Freud didn't start out trying to disturb the foundations of society. In fact, he began as a traditional neurologist in Vienna, hoping to understand the mind through science. But what he discovered didn't fit neatly into microscopes or anatomy textbooks. Instead, he found something far more dangerous, something invisible, repressed, and buried deep within every person: the unconscious. Freud's first awakening came not through a grand revelation, but through quiet observation. He listened, not just to what his patients said, but to what they avoided, what they forgot, and what slipped out by accident. From their dreams, slips of the tongue, and repetitive behaviors, he began to piece together a terrifying pattern. The human mind was not a clean slate or a rational machine. It was a battlefield, and most of the war was happening in secret. The more he listened, the clearer it became. People were haunted by desires they couldn't admit, emotions they couldn't explain, and traumas they couldn't remember. But these hidden forces didn't stay buried. They found ways to speak. A nervous tic, an addiction, a sabotaged relationship. Freud saw these symptoms not as flaws, but as coded messages from the unconscious, and decoding them would become his life's mission. What made Freud so revolutionary, and so feared, was his claim that we are not the authors of our thoughts. He shattered the Enlightenment idea that humans are rational beings. Instead, he revealed us as divided creatures, driven by impulses we deny, repress, and disown. And among those impulses, none were more taboo than desire, especially sexual desire. Freud dared to say what no one wanted to hear: that even our love, our ambitions, our ideals, are all stained by the shame of unconscious craving. But perhaps the most painful truth he uncovered was this: the part of you that sabotages your happiness isn't your enemy. It's your protector. Freud saw self-sabotage, procrastination, anxiety, not as defects but as defense mechanisms. Shields forged in childhood to guard you from unbearable pain. And while they once kept you safe, today they keep you small. They block you from intimacy, from joy, from growth. And unless you confront them, you'll stay trapped. By turning his gaze inward, Freud forced the entire world to do the same. He wasn't just analyzing dreams. He was decoding the very language of the soul. He held up a mirror to humanity and showed us what we didn't want to see. But he also offered a way out. Through honesty, introspection, and the courage to face the shadow, he believed we could begin to heal. And so, Freud's awakening wasn't just personal, it was a philosophical earthquake. It changed how we see ourselves, our pasts, and our potential. But the journey he began would only grow darker from here. Because once you admit that your conscious self is not in charge, who or what is? 2. The shame beneath desire. Childhood, repression, and the forbidden self. Freud's most unsettling discovery wasn't just that desire drives us. It's that it begins in childhood, long before we understand the world or ourselves. And it's not innocent. According to Freud, even children harbor impulses they're not supposed to have: jealousy, rage, lust, guilt. The family, far from being a safe haven, is the first stage where these forbidden feelings play out, hidden behind smiles, bedtime stories, and polite silence. At the center of this inner drama is the Oedipus complex, one of Freud's most controversial ideas. He argued that deep down, a child experiences conflicting feelings toward their parents: love, dependence, and protection, yes, but also rivalry, possessiveness, and desire. It's not that we literally want to harm or seduce our parents. It's that we develop emotional bonds so intense that the lines between love and control, affection and domination, start to blur. And when society tells us those feelings are wrong, we do what every child must do to survive. We repress them. But repression doesn't delete. It buries. Freud believed that the mind is like a pressure system. What you push down with guilt and shame doesn't vanish. It grows stronger underground. And eventually it returns. Not as memories, but as symptoms: panic, compulsions, nightmares, sexual dysfunction, depression. In trying to protect ourselves from social rejection, we create a deeper threat, an identity that splits in two. This split is what Freud called the conflict between the ID, the ego, and the superego. The ID craves pleasure and gratification. The superego is the voice of morality and social norms. And the ego? It's stuck in the middle, trying to keep the peace. But this balance rarely holds. Most of us live our lives caught in the crossfire between what we want and what we're allowed to want. And it's in that tension that shame is born. Freud wasn't interested in shaming people for their impulses. Quite the opposite, he wanted to free them from it. He believed that until we drag our desires out of the darkness, we remain prisoners of them. The shame we feel around sexuality, anger, neediness, those aren't signs of weakness. They're clues. Traces of the inner child that was told to be good, to be quiet, to behave. But that child never stopped wanting. Our adult lives become a theater of denial. We project our forbidden longings onto others. We fall in love with people who hurt us. We sabotage our own success just before it arrives. We stay in relationships where we are unseen, because being invisible feels safer than being rejected. Freud's genius was to show that these aren't random patterns, they're reenactments. The past, disguised as the present, looping endlessly until we choose to break the script. And yet, this confrontation is terrifying. To face your own repressed desires is to face who you truly are beneath the mask. It's to admit that part of you wants what you were told you must never want. But in that admission, there is freedom. Shame only holds power when it's hidden. When it's seen, it begins to dissolve. And as Freud wrote, "Where ID was, there ego shall be." In other words, what you once feared in yourself can become your strength. Freud didn't offer easy comfort. He offered a mirror and dared us to look. Because only by seeing what lives in the shadows of our childhood can we begin to understand the longings that haunt our adult lives. And this was just the beginning. The next step was even more dangerous, asking what society does with those who refuse to repress. 3. Civilization and its discontents. How society teaches you to suppress your truth. Freud's theory of repression didn't stop with the individual. He saw something even more sinister. Society itself is built on repression. In his later work, Civilization and its Discontents, Freud made a bold, disturbing claim: everything we call progress, morality, or civilization is paid for with the currency of human desire. To live together peacefully, we must suppress the very impulses that make us feel most alive. From childhood, we're taught to trade authenticity for approval. We're rewarded for obedience, punished for emotional outbursts, scolded for curiosity that goes too far. In this process, we learn to cut off parts of ourselves: the lust, the rage, the longing for power, the hunger for freedom. We're told that these are dangerous, and maybe they are, but they're also ours. According to Freud, culture offers you an illusion. If you behave, you'll be safe. If you conform, you'll be loved. But behind this promise is a prison, a life lived under surveillance, not by others but by your own superego. The inner critic becomes your jailer. You monitor your every move, censor your thoughts, doubt your desires. And what's left is not a free person, but a well-adjusted mask. Freud argued that neurosis, the suffering of the modern soul, is the price we pay for being civilized. We walk around depressed, anxious, addicted, not because we're broken, but because we're split. The cost of belonging is self-betrayal. And the more advanced society becomes, the more refined the repression. We medicate away emotion, optimize away boredom, distract ourselves with screens and consumption. But underneath, the ache remains. This was Freud's most controversial legacy. The idea that the tension between our inner drives and society's demands is unresolvable. There is no utopia where you get to be fully yourself and perfectly accepted. The human condition, he believed, is tragic. To live in a community, you must sacrifice part of yourself. But if you sacrifice too much, you become hollow. The solution is not to rebel blindly, nor to conform completely, but to find a conscious balance. Freud never promised peace. What he offered was insight. He wanted us to understand that our suffering is not personal failure, it's structural. You were taught to hate parts of yourself to fit in, but those parts never disappeared. They're waiting, still alive, still potent, still yearning to be seen. And perhaps that's the deeper rebellion, not to reject society, but to reclaim yourself within it, to feel desire and not hide it, to name your shame and walk through it, to speak your truth, even if your voice trembles. Freud's vision was not about destruction, it was about integration. Healing, not by erasing what is unacceptable, but by understanding why it was rejected in the first place. Because at the core of every symptom is a story, a truth you weren't allowed to speak. And the more you decode that story, the more power you reclaim. But this journey inward doesn't stop at the mind. Freud believed the body itself carries our secrets, and that the path to freedom runs through the very desires we've been taught to fear. For desire and the body, the return of what you repress. You can lie to your mind. You can rewrite memories, ignore your dreams, rationalize your pain. But your body never forgets. Freud saw the human body not as a machine, but as a living archive of everything you've ever repressed. Every flinch, every tight muscle, every sudden illness or sexual dysfunction, it all tells a story. A story about what you were once forbidden to feel. According to Freud, desire doesn't disappear, it changes shape. What begins as pure instinct becomes coded in posture, in tension, in symptoms. That back pain that won't go away. The insomnia that strikes every night at 3 a.m. The erotic dreams you pretend not to remember. These aren't random, they're encrypted messages from your unconscious, begging to be heard. This is why Freud believed that healing requires more than talk. You have to feel what was once buried. You have to let the forbidden back in. This is terrifying, because desire, especially repressed desire, doesn't return politely. It erupts. It shatters the image you've spent a lifetime building. You may suddenly feel anger toward people you're supposed to love. You might crave experiences that go against your values. You might realize you've been living a life designed by shame, not by truth. But there's freedom in the eruption. Because once you allow yourself to feel what you truly feel, the body softens. The symptom loosens its grip. Freud saw this in his patients. As they uncovered hidden memories, their bodies changed. Hysteria faded. Paralysis reversed. Illness gave way to understanding. The symptom, he realized, was not the problem. It was the solution your unconscious had found when no one would listen. This insight changed everything. Freud wasn't curing people. He was helping them translate their pain. And often, at the core of that pain was blocked desire. Desire not just for sex, but for intimacy, for power, for control, for attention. Desires that had been shamed in childhood, and then twisted into self-sabotage in adulthood. The moment you say, "I want," is the moment you reclaim your life. Of course, society doesn't like that. People who know what they want, and are unashamed to pursue it, are dangerous. They unsettle others. They break the rules. Freud understood this. That's why he called repression the cornerstone of civilization. But he also believed that without desire, life becomes numb. Repression protects the social order, yes, but at the cost of the human soul. To reconnect with your body is not to regress. It's to remember. To remember who you were before you were told who to be. To feel, again, the hunger, the curiosity, the wildness that made you fully alive. And in doing so, you begin to reverse the damage. Because every time you listen to what your body says, you're telling your unconscious, "I'm ready. I'm not afraid anymore." Freud knew that this path was risky. But he believed it was the only path to wholeness. Not through perfection, but through integration. To bring the dark into the light. To stop hiding from yourself. Because what you repress owns you. What you face sets you free. 5. Becoming whole. Freud's final message about the self. After decades of listening to dreams, decoding symptoms, and watching people suffer in silence, Freud arrived at a profound and unsettling truth. Healing isn't about eliminating the bad parts of yourself, it's about learning to live with them. Integration, not purification. Wholeness, not perfection. That was his ultimate message. Freud's model of the psyche, the ID, ego, and superego, was never meant to cage us. It was a mirror. He showed us that we are constantly negotiating between instinct and morality, between what we crave and what we're told is right. And that conflict doesn't make us broken, it makes us human. The goal is not to silence the ID or destroy the superego, but to develop an ego strong enough to hold the tension. In this model, the ego becomes a kind of spiritual warrior. It listens to the hunger of the ID without letting it dominate. It hears the commands of the superego without becoming a slave. It learns to navigate desire, shame, fear, and truth without collapsing. This is not easy. It requires a deep honesty with oneself, a willingness to face uncomfortable truths and resist the temptation of easy answers. Freud believed that the people who suffered the most were often those who had repressed the most. The child who learned to smile instead of scream. The adult who built a career around hiding their vulnerability. The lover who runs every time they feel truly seen. These are not weak people. They are survivors. But survival strategies don't always make for fulfilling lives. To go from surviving to living, we must do something radical. Befriend our shadow. Freud didn't use the word shadow, that was Jung's territory, but the idea is the same. The shadow is everything you pushed away to be accepted. And integration means inviting it back in. This doesn't mean acting on every impulse or abandoning morality. It means recognizing that your rage has a message, your jealousy has a wound, your lust has a longing behind it. When you stop shaming these parts, they stop controlling you from the dark. This is the paradox at the heart of Freud's vision. The more you try to be good, the more your shadow will sabotage you. But when you bring your darkness into the light, it softens. It becomes an ally. Freud saw this again and again. Patients who faced their shame, who spoke the unspeakable, often experienced not chaos, but clarity. Not destruction, but rebirth. In the end, Freud wasn't just a scientist or a theorist. He was a guide through the labyrinth of the human soul. He showed us that our desires are not accidents, and our shame is not proof of sin. They are part of a deeper, richer story. A story of longing, survival, and the search for authenticity. To follow Freud's path is not to fix yourself, but to understand yourself. To make peace with the contradictions that live within you. To say, yes, I am angry and I am kind. I am fearful and I am brave. I am full of desire and I am worthy of love. This is what it means to be whole. Because the final truth Freud uncovered, the truth that so many still run from, is this: your wounds are not the end of your story. They are the beginning of your awakening, and the self you've been searching for has always been hiding in the very place you were taught to fear. What can we learn from Freud today? Sigmund Freud was not merely a doctor dissecting dreams. He was a rebel with a scalpel, cutting through the polite illusions of modern life to expose the raw, inconvenient truths beneath. His ideas still make people uncomfortable, and that's precisely why they matter. The first lesson Freud teaches us is that shame does not mean something is wrong with you. It means you've been told to hide something human. Our society rewards repression and calls it discipline. It punishes vulnerability and calls it weakness. But Freud dared to say the opposite. Your shame points to your deepest needs, your buried power. What you're afraid to face is exactly where your freedom begins. Second, he teaches us that healing is not about becoming better. It's about becoming real. The self we show the world is often a mask, a costume stitched from expectations, fears, and polite lies. But beneath that mask is the real you, the you who was once curious, wild, angry, needy, honest. The you who still longs to speak. And unless we find the courage to hear that voice, we will continue to live someone else's life. Third, Freud reminds us that desire is not a problem to be solved. It is a compass to be understood. Whether it points to love, creativity, power, or even destruction, it's trying to tell you something about what you're missing. Repressing it will not make it go away. Listening to it just might make you whole. He also teaches us to stop pathologizing our pain. What you call dysfunction might be a brilliant adaptation. What you think is self-sabotage might be your soul saying no to a life that isn't yours. Freud didn't see symptoms as enemies. He saw them as messengers. And the moment you stop silencing them is the moment they begin to speak with clarity. Perhaps the most radical idea Freud ever shared is this. You are not meant to be pure. You are meant to be integrated. Light and dark. Logic and desire. Love and rage. To accept this is not to give in to chaos. It's to finally take responsibility for who you are. Because the shadow you run from is not your enemy. It is your teacher. And what you repress today will become your prison tomorrow. So, ask yourself, what are you still hiding? What part of you is starving for expression, for truth, for acknowledgement? The journey Freud invites us on is not easy, but it is real. And in a world obsessed with appearances, nothing is more powerful than a person who dares to face themselves. Because in the end, Freud didn't just diagnose the wounds of modern life. He gave us the courage to look at them, to name them, to reclaim the parts of ourselves we were taught to exile. And in doing so, he left us with a map that still leads to something rare and radical, a life that is truly your own. Now it's your turn. Which part of this message resonated most with you? Have you ever confronted your own shadow, or are you still running from it? Leave your comment and share your experience. And if this video made you reflect, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, activate the notification bell, and share this message with someone who needs to hear it. See you in the next video.